If the Prime Minister looked pensive this morning, it was because he knew his meeting with the French leader would be this summit's most awkward.
Hey, Boris, how are you?
Emmanuel Macron reportedly told his host that the Franco-British relationship needs a reset. The use of that word an indication of how poor those relations are. Boris Johnson told him that a compromise over the Northern Ireland Protocol needed to be agreed quickly. The Prime Minister seemingly determined the row over the Brexit divorce deal should not rain on his G7 parade. Germany's Chancellor is usually more diplomatic than Mr. Macron, but this row over border checks is so serious that it includes threats of EU tariffs on British exports if it isn't resolved. Mr. Johnson told Angela Merkel that border checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK challenge British sovereignty and territorial integrity. But EU leaders say it's a question of the Prime Minister sticking to the terms of the deal which he agreed. The presidents of the EU Commission and Council didn't speak on camera either, in an attempt to tone down the rhetoric. Ursula von der Leyen tweeted her thoughts instead. Implement the Brexit agreement, she said. One of her officials telling me it was written in English, so the British should have understood it. None of these leaders wants to embarrass the Prime Minister, to spoil his moment in the sun here in Cornwall. But the fact remains that Brexit and its aftermath are continuing to sow mistrust. At the very moment when the Prime Minister is trying to bring together the world's leading democracies to face common challenges, with China being among the biggest of all. Joe Biden is leading the charge, telling this summit behind closed doors that he wants a strong statement on forced labour in China in tomorrow's communiqué. The promised G7 supply of over 1 billion vaccines to the world's poorest is partly to counter China's so-called vaccine diplomacy, as is an investment plan called Build Back Better World, an alternative to Chinese financing for building projects. This is not a cloudless summit with acrimony in the air over the Brexit trade deal. Yet with China on the horizon, the G7 democracies know they need to come together to combat the biggest human rights and security challenge anywhere in the world. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, Cornwall.
Well, for more on how the G7 is dealing with China, earlier I spoke to Lisa Curtis, who was US National Security Council Senior Director for South and Central Asia under one Donald J. Trump, and Noah Barkin, who founded the Watching China in Europe newsletter and podcast. I started by asking Lisa Curtis what the difference was between the way President Biden and President Trump dealt with China.
I think this is an important opportunity for President Biden to sort of rally the EU and the UK around a policy to address China's increased aggression, whether it be, cracking down on Uyghurs, its own population, or democracy activists in Hong Kong, or provocative military moves in the Taiwan Strait. It's important for the G7 and other countries to come together to deter some of this Chinese aggression. And I think the major difference from President Trump is that President Biden has placed alliances at the top of his agenda, rebuilding, restoring alliances. It's no secret that President Trump didn't really have a great appreciation for the power of democratic values to bind together partners in achieving joint goals. So I think that there will be a welcome to this new approach of bringing the countries together around values, particularly that of democracy, to stand up to authoritarian regimes. And in this case, we're talking a lot about China.
Right, Noah Barkin, that's quite an ask, isn't it, especially from some of his European allies. Are the Germans especially going to go along with the kind of tough language that Joe Biden is looking for?
Well, I think first it's important to say that European countries do share a lot of the concerns that the U.S. has about China, about its actions in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, the saber rattling with Taiwan, but also its economic policy approach, this state-driven approach which relies on subsidies, IP theft, forced technology transfer. But of course, as you mentioned, countries like Germany have deep economic ties with China. German car makers have doubled down on China over the past year, investing billions in the country. So the Europeans are, they want to strike a bit of a balance here. I think they're willing to talk about these human rights violations. I think there will also be a call for an investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. But they don't want to go too far. And I think the Biden administration realizes that. They're trying to put a positive spin on some of these initiatives, not make it all about anti-China.
Lisa, to put it bluntly, is President Biden increasingly asking, especially the Europeans, to choose? You're either with us or you're with the Chinese. And how awkward is that for them?
I don't think that's what President Biden is doing. I think he's saying, look, we have shared values. The G7, if the G7 is not going to push back against authoritarian policies of countries like China, not only China, but also Russia, then who will? I think what he's doing is he's trying to rally like-minded nations that value democracy and that can stand up to authoritarian policies wherever they come from. So I think that's the kind of positive vision that the Biden administration is pushing for. I understand there's skepticism. I think the biggest challenge that the Biden administration faces is that many of the European countries are frankly afraid that the U.S. might return to this America First approach. They see there's a segment of the American population that still supports that kind of isolationism. And so I think there is concern that the U.S. could snap back to those kinds of policies. So I think that's the biggest challenge that President Biden faces as he is trying to rally the G7 around these policies, asserting a democratic, open, transparent vision for the rest of the world.
No, I guess a pessimist might say that this is not just about containing China, but it actually might potentially set the stage for conflict.
Yes, well, I mean, that's certainly something that I don't think anybody wants, certainly military conflict with China. Certainly the Europeans, in Europe, there's very little appetite for confrontation. There's a desire to stay in dialogue with Beijing, not to descend into a sort of Cold War 2.0. The Europeans don't want the G7 to become a sort of anti-China coalition. But, a lot of this also depends on China. We've seen some very aggressive reactions by China, for example, to very limited EU human rights sanctions targeting officials in Xinjiang. So I think what is going to be very interesting is if we do see a united message from the G7 on Sunday, in the final communique, how is China going to react? Are they going to react in a provocative way? Are they going to take initiatives to punish some of these G7 countries? That could set us on a sort of downward spiral in relations, but nobody wants a conflict here.
Okay, got to leave it there. Lisa Curtis, Noah Barkin, thank you very much indeed.